The use of tanks was an integral part of battlefield warfare for both the Axis and Allies during World War II. But what happened when an enemy tank came into possession? In today's video, we look at the use of captured enemy tanks during World War II. Following World War I, tanks were perceived to be the future of land-based warfare. Countries invested a lot of time and money developing better tanks. During World War II, tanks of all shapes and sizes were created for differing situations. Some tanks were perceived to be better than others, and in some cases, the perception was from enemy soldiers. For the vast majority of the time, defeat over an enemy tank meant knocking it out or destroying it completely. But on occasion, a fully intact enemy tank, or at least one that required minimal repairs, would be captured. The Germans made widespread use of captured tanks and military equipment throughout the war. Even as early as the annexure of Czechoslovakia, Wehrmacht soldiers used enemy tanks. As they moved through France and the Low Countries and eventually opened the Eastern Front, enemy tanks were put to use within German armoured units. British, Dutch, French and Polish tanks were commonplace. But perhaps the most widespread use came from the Russian T-34s and the American Shermans. The Germans' quick advance in the early stages of Operation Barbarossa meant many Russian units, as well as factories and supply depots, were overrun. Numerous T-34s were pressed into service within German units, with makeshift swastikas or bar crosses painted on the turrets or hulls. This was a much needed addition. As was also the case with the Allies, friendly fire was likely to occur. German T-34s performed well overall. However, once the tide of the war turned and supplies for the captured tanks dried up, they were abandoned. The Germans were perhaps the most prevalent when it came to using captured tanks. This is likely because of the strain on their manufacturing capabilities, with the demand of fighting on so many fronts. The use of enemy tanks for the Allies was not as necessary as it was for the Germans. The production capacity for the Allies meant that any losses in armour could be replaced relatively quickly. German supply factories and depots wouldn't fall into Allied hands until later in the war, so use of Axis armour wasn't that common. However, it did occur. The fighting in North Africa would see Australian and British soldiers make use of Italian tanks. You can see here the kangaroos painted on the side to denote this captured Italian light tank. We also have further examples here, with a group of US soldiers on a German armoured car and what appears to be a Panzer II. Note the white stars painted on each. Finally, we have another example here of US soldiers riding on top of a Sturmgeschütz Mark III. One of the most famous examples of a captured enemy tank would fall to the British. Nicknamed Cuckoo, a German Panther heavy tank would be found abandoned in a barn. She was put to service with British forces and took part in a number of attacks. She performed extremely well, however, eventually her fuel pump failed and the British were forced to abandon her. The use of enemy tanks was certainly a great opportunity for both the Axis and Allied forces to see the war from their enemy's perspective. What did you think about the use of captured enemy tanks during World War II? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section down below. As always guys, thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that subscribe button if you want to expand your knowledge and join the growing Premier History community.